The year was 2001, the Strokes had just released their first album, and they were celebrating. It was a killer party, highlighting some of the band's first exposure to celebrity outside of their childhoods. Like Courtney Love, who unfortunately had different intentions that night. She was hoping to teach the Strokes frontman, Julian Casablancas, a valuable lesson on balancing ego and fame. Something she's really good at. Unfortunately, he couldn't care less, shutting the conversation down almost immediately and inspiring the song, "But Julian, I'm a little bit older than you." And yet, I can imagine one alleged quote must have lingered in the frontman's mind for years to come, when she whispered in his ear, "This is your bleach. Your next record has to be Nevermind." We had this deadline with Room on Fire, and there wasn't as much time. There was a certain amount of pressure, a sense that we had to get another album out before people forgot about us. The Strokes were no strangers to pressure. Only a few months after being swept from the New York underground and flown to the UK, the worldwide music press clung onto them like a lone buoy in a sea of boring bands, plastering the Strokes on the cover of countless magazines and touting them as the saviors of rock and roll. And who could blame them? Julian Casablancas, Albert Hammond Jr., Nick Valensi, Fabrizio Moretti, and Nikolai Fraiture were rock stars. Their stage presence, fashion sense, charisma, and lifestyle were unlike any of their contemporaries. But with all this push from the press, and only a scarcely printed EP serving as their catalog, many began to doubt that the Strokes could actually deliver.
These guys are the Strokes from New York City.
Oh, yeah?
Julia, Nick, you have some fans.
I love you guys. You rock.
They suck, man. They suck.
Oh.
Thankfully, the band had developed so much material before the chaos that they were able to quickly release their first album, Is This It?, at the tail end of 2001. With the debut garnering near universally positive reviews even from the most skeptical critics, all theories of overhyping and industry planting were quashed. Similarly, Is This It was a moderate hit in sales, with Q Magazine reporting just under a year later that the album had sold 1.6 million copies. Not bad for a band with a median age of 21, but still not enough to rid them of that pressure. Because that same article also mentioned that nearly 400,000 of those sales were in Britain, which is strange for an American band. After admittedly doing really well in the New York club scene, the Strokes had signed to a British label, sold out British tours, released a British EP, and even mostly appeared in British magazines. It shouldn't have come as a shock that a quarter of their sales came from the island, but it was worrisome how little influence they had outside of it. In the greater United States especially, the band mostly stalled out sales-wise, hardly making a dent even on the rock charts. Now, of course, money isn't everything. It certainly wasn't the band's top priority, as they would go on to turn down Heineken commercials and VMA performances. But they weren't trying to hide from the world either. Why do you think they did those photo shoots? We play the game. We're not doing press just to be famous. You made a record, you're really proud of it, and you want everybody in the world to be able to buy it if they want to. And this is the kind of ass-kissing you have to do to make that happen. The Strokes were dead set on making great music that hit as many ears as possible. They wanted to be big for the right reasons. So when the first album didn't sell exceptionally well, especially at home, that hurt. And when it started getting amazing reviews, with some people already calling it their career peak, it fucking terrified them. It was particularly hard for Julian, just the pressure of everything, being the lead singer, writing the songs. It affected him a lot. No sleep, too much going out and messing around, all of that combined, plus the stress, will get to you. Somehow, by releasing a great album with pretty good sales, the Strokes had doubled the pressure they were put under. It seemed they had to prove themselves all over again. And with the band being nowhere near ready for another release, they did what they could. They toured. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Ireland, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Czechia, Austria, Italy, France, Spain, Iceland, Australia, Canada, Mexico, 38 US states, and Japan. 219 performances in just under 2 years before they had to stop. I never thought I would have such a tough time being on tour. We agreed to do more than we could handle. We thought we'd be fine to do 6 shows a week for 2 years. But as it turns out, people can't do that, man. The thing about touring, especially at the level of the Strokes, is that they weren't just lounging at the hotel pool between performances and bus trips, they kept a busy schedule. Julian and Nick would explain to NME in 2001 that on a typical day, they'd wake up at 2 p.m., do an interview, maybe a photo shoot, then eat, soundcheck, and perform, with many of their shows starting between 7 and 9, 50-minute set list, and the rest of the night dedicated to doing what young men do. There wasn't much time for anything extra, like songwriting.
I mean, I've heard that you guys aren't particularly big fans of riding on the road, so were these just like...
It's not big fans, and it's so hard to do it. It's almost impossible for us. We kind of need to be stuck in the studio because spend hours on it and not just like the 5-minute sound check.
Yeah, there's not a lot of time on the road is what it is. Like, when do you really get to work on new stuff?
Yeah.
We actually have a really good idea of how much writing the Strokes got done on tour because they started including new songs live as they were completed. Meet Me in the Bathroom in November of 2001, which may partly be inspired by Courtney Love, Between Love and Hate in December, I Can't Win and The Way It Is in March of 2002, and You Talk Way Too Much in August. That's 5 songs, which matches the 5 new songs that both Mojo and NME would mention in August of 2002. And 5 just isn't enough. However, not all the blame can be put on their hectic schedule. There were about 100 song parts that died a slow death for this album, but that's the same philosophy we've always had. When you think you know how to write songs, that's when you're fooling yourself. Julian may just be using the royal we here, because while the Strokes were an equal partnership, in 2001 at least even legally, with them splitting all the band's income 6 ways, only one of them wrote all the music, and he's the one that just so happened to be obsessed with perfection. Reading interviews from this era, it's jarring how often the usually reserved and jovial Julian is caught on the verge of a meltdown. Sitting in an empty bar with one interviewer after a show on the band's struggling American tour and whispering through his hair, "It tears me apart that you can't do it in a really original way and be successful." This can partly be chalked up to the frontman's drinking, an issue that would cause deeper conflict on later albums. But it's also evidence of the pressure the Strokes were feeling from every angle. Their first album was a hit with critics, but not with audiences. It had been a year since their last output, with very little new material, and the near constant touring and traveling had them worn down to the bone. So when their last shows with Jimmy Fallon wrapped at the end of 2002, they finally slowed down, returning home in November with plans to hit the studio that next January. Did they? No. Upon settling back in New York City, many of the Strokes took full advantage of their newfound freedom, wasting nights away in familiar bars and enjoying long Caribbean vacations. All except for Julian. I didn't want a vacation. The thing is, I don't need time off. I like to have time to work. For me, working on music is not a chore. It's really all I want to do. It's all I enjoy doing. Clearly, touring wasn't the only thing inhibiting a healthy work-life balance. Still, this ravenous work ethic meant Julian could finally catch up on his songwriting and get the band back in the studio in time for the next album's 2003 release date. But it would take the Strokes a few months to actually start production, with a major factor likely being the question of their next producer. It's not going to be like, oh, now that we're successful, we're going to work with all these super producer guys that are going to make us a top-selling hit. That's never been our goal. We still want that edge. But either in spite of that sentiment or totally in line with it, the Strokes took a big swing with their eventual choice, announcing in March of 2003 that they would be working with Nigel Godrich. To put it mildly, Nigel is a legend. He would go on to collaborate with Paul McCartney, Beck, and Edgar Wright, but these other names are basically filler in comparison to his accomplishments with by far his longest collaborators, Radiohead. First serving as producer on the incredible Iron Lung EP and The Bends, he would stay in this role for decades, helping perfect the rest of the band's incredible catalog and walking hand in hand with Radiohead as they evolved beyond all expectation and redefined the rock genre. So he was a pretty good choice. And yet, in May of 2003, only 2 months after the Strokes started working with Godrich, their manager announced that the collaboration had ended. Luckily, music journalists at the time found this story just as juicy as me and did not stop asking what happened until every detail was revealed.
We asked him, we said, would you come and can we try 2 songs with you?
Yeah.
And see what it's like, to see if maybe we can do a record, just curiosity, you know.
The whole point, I think, was to see how it would affect the sound of the Strokes.
Turns out, too much. We've never trusted the "we'll fix it in the mix" attitude. It's phase by phase. First we get a sound, then we get all the sounds of all the instruments, and we see how they sound all together, and then we record. With Nigel, you'd just lay down your track and then have a seat in the lounge and come back and listen to what they'd done. And we're just not used to working that way. We did that with Gil Norton a long time ago, and those recordings were disregarded as well. Disregarded is an understatement. To this day, the Godrich recordings are lost to the sands of time, with unfortunately not a single one of the two demos leaking before the Strokes changed their mind and had them destroyed. But before you think that's petty on their part, this goes beyond a simple lack of control. Not only did the Strokes work poorly with Nigel, they straight up despised the music they made together. It was like you'd hear the songs and you didn't know why, but it wouldn't move you. How did that make me feel? Oh, intense panic. I started not trusting the songs, and I thought our career was over. The songs, all of a sudden, became meaningless to me. It was very scary. Your livelihood at stake. I don't know exactly what everyone felt. I'm sure everyone was a little, uncomfortable at the prospect of sounding like shit, but the intensity of it was maybe more of a thing in my mind than other people's. But I think we all felt the same way. We all felt a communal yikes. It's a feeling, honestly, that I will not miss. You don't sleep. You don't eat. I don't sleep anymore. Maybe now I will. I didn't realize how mentally damaging it would be at the time. So, Nigel Godrich was out. Completely. And with limited time to search for a replacement and the Strokes' confidence shaken, they decided against taking another risk. Returning to Is This It producer Gordon Raphael and starting production for real this time in May of 2003. But the pressure wouldn't give. Even with Gordon again seeming to be a perfect match for the band, helping manifest that iconic Strokes sound, giving them control and streamlining the process wherever possible, the months wasted writing material they couldn't on the road and working with Godrich meant that for the first time the band's label was breathing down their neck. The Strokes had signed to RCA back in 2001 for the very reason that they trusted the band and gave them more freedom than any other interested label. Now, with a release date looming just 5 months away, the label harshly restricted their time in the studio. 2 months was all they had. And though they put everything they could into those sessions, recording late into the night and consistently working what Magnet magazine would call a 23-hour day, 2 months just wasn't enough. I remember being in the studio on that last day and just staying up 24 hours straight trying to work out all these last little kinks. I think the album would have ended up a lot better if we'd had another couple weeks. Music journalist and friend of Julian, Mark Spitz, recalls the severity of the frontman's anxiety in the weeks leading up to the second album's release. Like one night when they were meant to be enjoying themselves, hanging out with 2 girls at Mark's apartment, Julian was hopelessly distracted, playing the album on his boombox over and over, staring at the speakers, whispering, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know." But all of Julian's uncertainties would be put to rest on October 28th, 2003, when Room on Fire was released worldwide, with music videos and singles catching the attention of all new listeners everywhere. And in much the same way as Is This It, the reception was bittersweet. Commercially, the album's performance is more than a little muddled. Usually I go off of RIAA, the people that give out gold and platinum records, but they claim that neither Room on Fire nor Is This It would sell 1 million copies until over a decade after release. This is weird, because several outlets at the time reported that the band had sold 2 million records fairly quickly, and we literally have a photo of the band with their Room on Fire platinum record. I mean, it could be silver, but would they really show that off? The only source I could find that reported the sales of the second album at the time was Magnet magazine, who claimed pretty realistically that Room sold half as well as its predecessor. Regardless, it can't be denied that this was far from the Nevermind level success that some were expecting. Critically, at least, from the reviews that survive today, we can gather that Room performed exceptionally well, with an 8 out of 10 from Rolling Stone, a 9 out of 10 from NME, and a 10 out of 10 from Q magazine. Again, winning the favor of even the most doubtful and hating reviewers. Rest in peace, Pitchfork. But still, it's complicated. Even the most positive reviews note the album's clear similarities to its predecessor. Both Room on Fire and Is This It feature production by Gordon Raphael, with similar instruction by the band to keep the sound small and timeless, and an intentional choice by Casablancas not to stray too far from the lyrical themes of the original. These surface-level similarities were enough for many critics to discredit the album entirely, seeing it as proof that the Strokes had lost their spark, or that they had never had one to begin with. The Strokes themselves, however, didn't take the criticism so seriously. Drummer Fab Moretti, at least, embraced it entirely, telling Q magazine, "This record is like a cousin of the first one. They're from the same gene pool. And this guy happens to be a little more experienced and a little older." But Julian has a complicated relationship with his cousins.
I remember I used to have a big crush on my Danish cousin, and we made out when we were little kids. And every time I see her now, it's like it's on my mind, but I can never say it to her. Because she was really, she was really hot, she's really beautiful.
He mentions in basically every interview from this era an obsession with progress. He could not stand the idea of the Strokes losing their edge and being left behind. And though he was better at hiding his feelings and eccentricities in the interviews after the album's release, it's clear he was conflicted, telling NME in June of 2004, "I was happy with it. I thought it was cool, but we probably didn't play the game enough. There's a struggle when you think you're doing something good, but people shit on it because you're not sucking dick. It evolved, but it didn't evolve as insanely as people desired." While inversely telling Rolling Stone in 2005, "Room on Fire was a mad dash all the way. It was such a silly situation to be in. We were up 48 hours straight, working all through the night to get it to the mastering studio on time, saying stuff like, 'It's shit and it doesn't sound right, but hey, it's good enough.'" Guitarist Albert Hammond seems to have had an "it is what it is" mentality, arguing that if the album had strayed too far from the original, people would be complaining about that instead, while admitting in order to change your sound drastically, you have to be in the studio for a year and a half. We had 2 months. The change will happen slowly. Maybe right now you can't see it because it sounds similar, but on our 5th record, you'll notice where we were going. It's true what Albert says here. Even if interviews give us a vague idea of what the band thought of the album, the next project proves they learned a couple lessons. The 1-year production time and amicable firing of Gordon Raphael on album 3 especially shows their commitment to serious change. But time has been kind to the band's sophomore outing. It's ironic that with modern review aggregates, we can put Is This It and Room on Fire side by side and see they have an identical critic score. And without the hype of the first record or the need to deliver a hot take, more recent reviews of the album are consistently flattering. With Pitchfork writing in 2011, Room on Fire mostly does what second albums are designed to do, further define the band's sound while simultaneously exploring its boundaries. Room on Fire is varied, yet always careful never to stray too far from the territory the Strokes had already staked out as their own. It mostly sounds like a natural progression. The struggles that the Strokes faced on their second album were entirely different than their first, all thanks, ironically, to the success of the first. It's thanks to their debut that the band performed almost 2 years of non-stop tours, worked with Nigel Godrich, faced hostile critics, and even got the stern talking to from Courtney Love. They couldn't match all the expectations put on them. I don't think any band could. But they delivered the only thing they had to. They made a great album. And good music shines through. Julian himself even seems to have warmed up to the album entirely, with a Rolling Stone interview from 2014 claiming that he prefers Room on Fire to Is This It, saying, "I wanted to finish the Is This It thought. Even when we were doing it, I always thought it was part 2 of Is This It. I think we always felt like we were in jeopardy. When we did Room on Fire, things were established, but things were internally, at least from my perspective, not healthy." It's clear that time has given the frontman clarity on the successes and failures of his youth. But perhaps it didn't come soon enough. The pressure didn't fade after Is This It, nor did it after Room on Fire. It would only build from here. And with a shaky foundation in the form of a dysfunctional band, it would keep building and building and building until the whole thing came crashing down. Hey, if you liked the video, like the video. If you like me, subscribe. I have more videos, so you should watch those videos. Thank you. Special thanks to these beautiful sources and to you for watching till the end. Leave a comment and let me know if you want more strokes. I'm gonna leave now. Goodbye.